Welcome to the Tech Transform podcast, where we have weekly conversations with people impacting the enterprise tech landscape. My name is John Arnold, and I'm the principal of J. Arnold & Associates, an independent analyst practice providing thought leadership and go-to-market counsel across the cloud communications space. Today, I'm speaking with Kyle Campos, CTPO at CloudBolt, about Augmented FinOps and the role of machine learning in automating cost management processes. Okay, we are going to have a nice conversation today about a topic that maybe is only partially understood, but we're going to get the full picture today. What I mean by that is the FinOps space is fairly well defined, but the augmented side of what we mean by FinOps is kind of the new twist, and we're going to explore that together with Kyle. So let's get the foundation set first here, Kyle, and maybe talk a bit about first the baseline of what is FinOps and how it's transforming the way organizations manage cloud from a financial operations perspective.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, John. Good to be here with you. So yeah, FinOps, is a community of practitioners, vendors. It's an ecosystem that has really brought on a new framework and practices for how you manage cloud spend. And this became a pressing issue when the previous sort of financial operations practices and a CapEx model where you're doing these, annual or longer big CapEx purchases for hardware, and then, you do capacity planning schedules, et cetera. That was all pretty well baked. And then, as cloud adoption began to kind of skyrocket and this OpEx model disrupted that. And there was a whole gap of practices, no pun intended, not GAAP, but a sort of blind spot of, okay, well, now I just got, early on it's hitting our credit card and it just keeps growing and nobody really knows why, or our invoices keep growing and we're not sure why. That was kind of the flip side of the coin to having all this on-demand usage patterns where now engineering and product was highly empowered to get what they needed as soon as they needed it. But that put the rest of the organization in this sort of catch-up mode where they didn't really know, why those purchases were being made. Were they optimal, unoptimal? Is it expected, unexpected? So that pain point took some time to develop, but it just, shone a light on the fact that, finance and engineering had to come together in ways that previously they didn't come together on, or maybe annually budget cycles. That's the only time they talk to each other. But now this was an ongoing need. So, FinOps, financial and DevOps practices coming together, a framework was developed around some best practices on how you inform an entire organization around what is this spend? How is it allocated across our business lines? And then how do we optimize that? What does good look like in this new paradigm? And then lastly, how do we operate that? How do we put that into a BAU process? How do we find problems before they begin, et cetera? So that's really what the FinOps practice is helping, has helped define, and now helping businesses get more and more value out of the cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think going back to really, pandemic was a real accelerator for cloud adoption for a lot of companies. And I think it's fair to say it's been a bit of a runaway train. I think this shift from, as you say, the traditional CapEx model where the hardware is all on site, the costs are fixed, IT knows how to manage it, and knows where everything is, how it works. And now you've got this, as you say, on-demand based model where with SaaS being kind of the standard now for just about everything. And we haven't even talked about AI, but I think even before AI, right, just this like consumption-based approach to technology hasn't been the culture of most organizations. So I'm saying this for the benefit of companies out there who might be listening who are still fairly premise-based and maybe have that more of a legacy mindset about technology and how do you define value and what does an ROI look like, and TCO model kind of goes out the window with SaaS, right, Kyle?
It's harder to track and it's harder to identify. The need is probably even greater than it was before because of it's kind of the, great power comes great responsibility here. It's on the positive side. It's removed so many barriers to sort of rapid growth inside of enterprises of like, hey, we see an opportunity in the market. We need to build rapidly in that space. Great. Anything is possible as soon as you get alignment on what should be done. Now, how do you bring that back to value generated? You mentioned AI. That's kind of like the Russian doll here of sort of obfuscation, and even harder to get ROI like at a unit level, right? So, okay, our cloud bills in general, our AI spend maybe more specifically is 2xing every 6 months, right? And then you look at the product side, well, how much of our actual revenue side can be attributed to that spend? Between those two questions is right now a lot of convoluted and difficult work to be able to arrive at those answers, much less have them at fingertips for, key business strategy decisions of like, hey, I need to know this continuously so that we're always adapting. So that is it's kind of hard to overstate that paradigm shift and its impact positively and negatively inside of a business. But herein lies the sort of importance of this practice, and like this has to be able to drive those efficiencies or facilitate those efficiencies inside of a business. There's only, it's a thin layer of ice that you can skate on with those two, the spend and the ROI side disconnected. There's only a finite amount of time you have before that really starts to collapse in on you.
Yeah. I mean, is it fair to say there might be a bit of a disconnect in terms of, say, the C-suite expectations about we need to be more agile, we need to be more innovative, but they really don't have a handle on the cost of this kind of open-ended model, right? The more you consume, the more you spend.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You say it that way. It's kind of like, we wanted you to be more agile and impactful, but not like that. Like, I didn't know that was going to come along for the ride, right? Absolutely. I think there is a disconnect, but I do think right now this is a healthy form of back pressure on the FinOps practice because this is a few years in here of sort of solid traction in the industry. And so a lot of the early promises, I think, especially for larger enterprises who have been invested in the FinOps movement since the early days, have gotten, early returns and are now looking for this sort of, more business impactful returns on the FinOps investment of the teams being built around this, the practices that have been put in place. You're starting to see the expectation from C-suites saying that should be more expansive, more impactful inside of our business. Why isn't it solving this key strategy decision? Why am I still struggling to get the insight out of this area? And of course, the ground shifts underneath us with sort of AI acceleration. New problems enter the stage, right, to make it even more sense of a back pressure there. So, I think there's been a lot of surveys and research done in this, including some of our own, that have showed that tension and that expectation gap of sort of business impact versus business activity. One of my favorite quotes from Bill Walton, don't mistake activity for achievement. And I think there's that kind of tension in the FinOps space, which is a good sign because you can only kind of stay hidden under the covers of like, hey, this is the right thing to do for best practice sake. And then at a certain amount of time, it has to have business level impact for C-suite to continue and invest in those practices. So I think you're starting to really see that play out, which is a good thing, good, healthy thing for any practice, but certainly for FinOps. I think this is where it takes the turn from just a practitioner-led, hey, I'm being asked to produce reports, and this is a more efficient way of doing it, more to a business ROI need of like, hey, executives key, strategic decisions need this type of impact now, and where is it, and why don't we have it yet?
Yeah, more strategic, right, for sure. And I definitely want us to get to the best practices piece of this, because as much as, the C-suite is in love with the magic of AI and what it can promise and deliver, it sure does come with a cost. And the thing I want to kind of emphasize here is that the best practices are really, really needed, because whether we like it or not, when you go down this route of SaaS and cloud, IT in particular gives up a lot of control. And we're all now, every organization, I would say, Kyle, is pretty much beholden to the hyperscalers. And so to me, best practices about how do you deal with them as partners, right? How do you to optimize your spend and get the best pricing and discounts and all that stuff. So I want to move to that. But before we get to that, I want to take that little kind of shift from FinOps, as we've been talking, to this concept of augmented FinOps. And I guess this is really speaking to where AI is kind of setting the pace now. So can you just parse it out a bit for us about what we mean by augmented and why it's different or additive to what FinOps has been to this point?
Yeah, there's a good clarifying statement that I like to echo every time this conversation comes up, especially in the FinOps community. This can get confused easily. So, there's two different parts of this. There's FinOps for AI, that conversation, which is essentially around how do we bring FinOps practices into the AI spend and, again, inform, optimize and operate that part of our business's spend. Conversely, on the other side, there's AI for FinOps, which is how do we use AI technology to help advance the FinOps practice. And when we're talking about augmented FinOps, it's really the AI for FinOps element that we're focusing in on here. And what this is just kind of acknowledging here is as cloud growth is expanded, not just sort of vertically in the amount of spend, but in horizontally the footprint, the amount of cloud services you're mentioning, of almost everything being driven via SaaS now, right? So the sort of surface area of concern here from a cloud spend is so vast. You bring in multi-cloud, hybrid cloud dimensions to that, right? And those are multiples on top of your footprint. It's generated a massive amount of data that has to be processed. There are some orthogonal initiatives here like Focus for a unified specification across cloud providers, et cetera, that helps with that data side. But that's just a specification and normalizing data. Now you're like, okay, getting to that sort of business impact, it is one easy measurement for us that I talk a lot about is this insight to action gap. From when the behavior is actually happening in your cloud infrastructure to when your systems let you know that there's something unoptimal about that spend, to when your business actually does something about it, acts upon it, that lead time is essentially identifying the need for faster processing and actioning of that data, which is where the augmented element comes into this, that it is such a vast amount of data that it's such a multivariate type of analysis that there's a lot of factors coming into play. You can't possibly swarm that with humans and expect that to be the efficient way to deal with this. So when we look at enterprises that have kind of the legacy human-led approach here, that lead time I was mentioning from the insight side all the way to the action, that can be quarters, if there's ever any action that happens against that insight. A lot of enterprises are stuck in just the sort of analysis of that data, and they can never get around to actioning because by the time they do, it's invalidated and they got to start all over again, right? So it's this sort of treadmill that they can't keep up with. On the sort of most efficient side, maybe that's a month, if they have a monthly sort of actioning process of like, all right, here's all the systems that we know are unoptimized. We're going to batch that up in a month. Well, that is a significant amount of waste that is just constantly being generated out of an ecosystem, an enterprise ecosystem. So, what I talk about in the augmented lens is having AI/ML processes that are evaluating all of that incoming data, that are turning that around into automated actions to resolve that, and shrinking that insight to action lead time from quarters, months to minutes and hours. This is the same kind of like disruption and transformation that continuous delivery had for like the DevOps ecosystem, which was humans used to get on to maintenance windows cycles, maybe, once every couple of weeks on a Thursday night and spend hours deploying something. And now that's been largely automated away, right? And that there's machines are deploying our new code continuously. That's the evolution that FinOps has to take to start providing the business impact that the C-suite is very hungry for to see on the bottom line.
Yeah. There's a lot in there, Kyle, and I guess they race literally down the path with AI. The costs start to mount pretty quickly. All these LLMs take a lot of horsepower to build and manage, but as you say, you've got to extract business value out of this. And so I would think, again, coming to the idea of best practices, I want us to get to like, what does that start to look like? Not just for the FinOps and DevOps folks, but also the C-suite, right? Because this treadmill is never going to stop. It's just going to get faster and go further, right? Until everything is automated, but then we'll all be out of jobs. But hopefully that's not too soon. But
we'll all have different jobs.
Different jobs. But certainly we've got to get to a point where, okay, can we justify the cost, right? We don't invest in this to save money, right? We invest in this to optimize resources and get the best returns and results, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a few things I would say in this area. One is it's imperative for the FinOps community to align with other practices, best practices that are related here, like ML ops in that community and how they're delivering machine learning best practices from an engineering perspective. So from a FinOps perspective, tying into those is very critical for us. This is not something we should be reinventing. We should be aligning with those types of best practices. So I think there's some good, in the last couple conferences, there's been some good talks around that. So I think we'll see that evolve well. The other, maybe a little bit more uncomfortable for some to tread through is FinOps in general has to remain or become in some cases a high leverage entity. And what I mean by that, I think it's very similar to platform engineering type of guiding light, which is a many to one impact inside of an organization, or I should say a one to many, meaning one human inside of platform engineering is having a massive amount of reach and impact inside of a company. There's, enterprises out there will talk about like, hey, one platform engineer has operational control of, 20,000 instances of applications in production, right? Those types of ratios are real. And similarly, in FinOps, it should be that type of one human to many impact inside of an organization. And I think this augmented element is really the key of that. Without that, we just keep flooding the team with more and more humans. And this is where I think the C-suite is also starting to get a little concerned around like, hey, I thought this was going to be a small and high impact team. And now that the surface area keeps growing, I keep getting asked for more and more humans to keep, growing the size of this team. And that type of low leverage ratio, I think, is a warning signal that things are not being approached appropriately here. So I think it is incumbent upon FinOps teams to make sure they're leaning into AI/ML practices here to, relieve the high toil elements of their job. Focus is a good start for that. We've aligned ourselves very tightly with that project. Now bringing in the sort of intelligent layers on top of that data processing is something we want to help accelerate inside of our customers. That's how you keep things keep things high leverage. And then to your point around managing the spend, all the same principles apply here around sort of unit economics and driving and aligning both the investment side and the spend side to particular product teams, particular capabilities, down to the service level and individual product feature lines. All of those FinOps practices still apply. There's just another added layer of spend here in AI/ML spend that we got to incorporate.
So for those who are kind of new to a lot of this, let's just make the connection a little clearer between AI and what it's doing for this augmented FinOps model. And I'm thinking specifically about machine learning. What is it bringing that is allowing us to scale adoption of SaaS services in an economical way, and that's cost justified?
Yeah, one of the most common ways here is, you can kind of expand upon the auto scaling technique from what used to be a sort of VM or container level. Now expand that thinking and to a cloud wide sort of breathing environment of how you're processing utilization telemetry, meaning the sort of how end users are actually leveraging the services we're building and the sort of demand side against the provision capacity side. And the tighter you can sort of hug that demand curve with your provision capacity, the more real-time reaction you have to change in that demand, the more waste you drive out of your system. That can never be human driven. The best humans have been able to do there is have scheduled sort of provisioning or deprovisioning cycles, right? Or a high use of spot instances as a specific technology selection here, or serverless practices, right? Where that's appropriate. But in general, ML helps you process a flood of that sort of utilization telemetry and learn about patterns that you may be blind to. It also helps us here correlate sort of related signals around, okay, yes, the demand curve looked like this, but you also had these types of incidents. You had this type of performance level, and then being able to help the humans set reasonable targets for we need our performance level to stay here, so don't make any deployment decisions that would risk that performance level or that sort of service level agreement with our customers. We've announced a couple things in this regard. We do this around Kubernetes as an example of making real-time deployment decisions based off of that usage pattern, that continuous usage pattern, learning about the patterns of that demand and sort of the provider side operational dynamics as well. So having that engine, that learning engine at your disposal helps you drive more and more intelligent and optimized decisions across your entire stack. So I think that's the sort of innovation curve we are on quite naturally. As more and more of these services start getting interrelated, you need that sort of learning system to help drive and then trigger those actions that we're talking about in an automated way.
Okay. All right. So to tie this all up, Kyle, and to kind of take us out, maybe just leave the listeners with maybe one or two kind of best practices that they should keep top of mind as they think about how is FinOps going to get the best kind of bang for their buck in terms of thinking about cloud adoption and keeping everybody happy. And I know it's a pretty big basket of people to keep happy.
Yeah. Basket keeps growing. I'd really kind of lean in on one here because I think it's so indicative of the entire life cycle, and that is that insight to action measurement. So what I would encourage, and we can provide some of our analysis here to help accelerate this, but really what it is taking a look at your signal generation today, meaning how does your system learn today of an unoptimal state in your cloud? The answer may be you don't have any way of finding that out in an automated way, and the humans have to go and mine it out. That's we want to deal in reality here. So starting there, you're like, okay, how often are my humans doing that? Is that once a month? All right, you got a 30-day lead time there. Once you have that insight, then measure How long does it take us to analyze that, to find like what's actionable, what should we be doing? Add that up on top of the lead time. Okay, once you know what should be doing, how long does it take for you to actually queue that work up and for engineers and for that work to actually get accomplished? After you add all that up, if you're anywhere beyond the realm of days, you know you have work to do. And I think that's where you got to start tracking that time period and working backwards and optimizing, back pressuring that time period to say, all right, we have to get, it might be on the informed side if you got humans pulling that out. All right, how do we get a FinOps platform in here that helps us do that in a real-time way so we don't not wasting that? Okay, great. Now, and you kind of step through that optimization process. How are we analyzing that? Okay, is my FinOps platform generating those recommendations on a continuous manner for us? Great. Now you will have collapsed that lead time. Okay, now you're on the action side. From those recommendations, can we automate that and collapse that amount of lead time? That's I would say the most clear, direct KPI that will help inform your maturity level across that entire FinOps curve. So I'd start there. Nobody should be blind to that. It's okay if it's a bad figure. You just need to know what it is so that you know what the next steps in your maturity are.
Yeah, no, that's a fair assessment. I think it's a good spot to land on here because I think everybody wants it, but you got to pay for it. And you got to have a model here. Okay, this is a good overview of what takes us into this whole area of augmented FinOps. So with that, Kyle, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your coming on. And thanks to everybody out there for listening. And we hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. For further information on what we've been talking about here, please head over to cloudbolt.io. And with that, we'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all the major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360 Tech and on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head over to the website at em360tech.com.